Hello, my name is Erwin Miersch. I'm the Executive Director for Cup of Excellence. For me, it's an honor actually to be back in Costa Rica, working with coffee. I did some of the first work here in Costa Rica back in 2006, doing a lot of the jury selection for Cup of Excellence. So for me, it has been an honor to really see how everything in specialty coffee has been growing in Costa Rica. Here we have a number of $90 million. We're going to be talking about this at the end of the presentation, so please keep that in mind. Obviously, we'll be talking about delivering excellence to the world. Cup of Excellence is the most stringent coffee competition in the world. Something that really sets us apart from the rest of the competitions that you see is that we are an organization that benefit all the coffees in one particular country, not just a particular set, not just a particular organization. We are open for large, medium, small, certified, organics, any type of coffees that are being produced. And we try to highlight that quality that it's being submitted to us. On this map, you can pretty much see, the impact that we have around the world. We have all of everything from Mexico till, Brazil in the Americas. We have done a lot of work in Africa, East Africa, Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi. And these are countries that pretty much are producing countries where we've been identifying and pretty much meeting our mission statement, which has always been to discover into the world and reward quality coffee. In the last board meeting, our board actually modified this mission statement. So now it's discover, reward, and deliver. As most of you guys know, there's a big problem around the world when it comes to logistics of delivering coffee. It's actually easier to deliver a container of coffee than it is to deliver a 30-kilo box that gets shipped, through a courier. But the impact that we've had, it's not only in the coffee-producing nations. We also have had a lot of impact in the consuming nations. North America, Asia, Europe. We have pretty much helped the small producers or the winning coffees of these competitions to form a direct relationship with a lot of these roasters. So these roasters come, they identify the coffees, the producers that they want to work with, through the competition, and they continue buying a lot of the coffees that they discover, from these producers. There's a lot of companies that have pretty much identified the sourcing that they're going to do for their coffee needs through this competition. Big, large company, well, medium-sized companies, can't say large. You guys probably know some of these in the United States, Intelligentsia, Stumptown, Counterculture. Most of the coffees that these companies are buying currently are from ex-Cup of Excellence producers or current Cup of Excellence producers. So we have also been doing a lot of work in country. A long time ago, the ICO did a study that, if every producing country consumed at least 10% of the coffees that they produce, then the coffee prices would be stable. Obviously, we can't talk about, as a producer, we're really happy with what's going on with the current coffee prices, although this does affect, the sustainability of a lot of these smaller roasters at origin. So Brazil has become a big consumer. Mexico has become a big consumer of the Cup of Excellence coffees that are being discovered around the world as well. Cup of Excellence was actually, came into being back in 1999. Happened to have, one of our founders here. And basically, they saw the need, of the Cup of Excellence because of a gourmet project that was being executed through the ICO, and they had done it at that time. It was Uganda and in Brazil. Obviously, Brazil being the first one, the success story, and from then, everything has been pretty much, history. So in the last 26 years, we have worked in 17 producing countries. You can see how back in 1999 we started with Brazil. Then it was Guatemala, and then we have actually the person who brought Cup of Excellence to Nicaragua, Mr. Roberto Bendaña, here in the crowd. That actually made contact with Ms. Susie Spindler to bring the country, and then the rest of the Central American countries started developing the competition. We've been pretty much very successful, on improving quality, fostering innovation. Costa Rica is a great example of what Cup of Excellence can do. In Costa Rica, it's very famous, for its honeys. You have the yellow honeys, red honeys, black honeys, all these other type of honeys, that you can see out there. Even though this processing technique was not developed in Costa Rica actually was the first one to come out and market it as a specific process. So in Cup of Excellence, we saw how these coffees were actually standing out in Costa Rica, getting a much higher score than your washed coffees and the other type of, actually it was just pretty much washed in honeys at the time. But we started pretty much identifying how process was actually making an impact on the flavor profiles of the coffees that were being presented. We've seen, Costa Rica was also the country that pretty much had the first anaerobic coffee to be a winner in the Cup of Excellence. At that time, it kind of blew the minds of a lot of people. They didn't know what to do with this coffee. For some people it was ferment, for some people it was not ferment. So Costa Rica has always been at the forefront of identifying, putting these coffees into competition, and actually creating a market for it. Up to now, we have auctioned off more than 10 million pounds of coffee, and all these coffees have, one thing in common. All these coffees are a combination of a unique set of circumstances. This could be includes everything, from variety, microclimate, soil, altitude. All these have to do with the quality that the coffee can actually produce. But if we add to these, the best practices at the farm level, this adds value, adds to the flavor profile. Apart from this, we also add, the processing, like we were talking about earlier, and what we have seen, the result of all these is a clean, sweet, award-winning coffee. So we always say that a Cup of Excellence coffee is a coffee with structure, and when we talk about structure, normally is a coffee that it's clean, sweet, and then the rest, of the flavor attributes that it may have. So for those of you who are not familiar with Cup of Excellence, I started out the presentation talking about the most stringent competition in the world. If you take in consideration that whenever you sell a container of coffee, normally what gets approved is anywhere between 5 to 10 cups before that container gets approved and gets shipped and received and approved by the client. In Cup of Excellence, we have 3 different phases. We have, if you consider the sample reception before, but we have a sample reception, then those coffees get cupped once at the pre-selection. And then those that advance go to a national level, and then we have 2 rounds of cuppings at that time. Then the best 40 go to the international phase, and these coffees get cupped 3 times at this stage. So in reality, for a lot that may be, 300 kilos on average, there's more than 200 cups of coffee that are being cut from that particular lot. So the consistency of these coffees have to be really, really stable. They really have to be there, and they have to exceed expectations all the way through. We were talking about innovation. Innovation is great, but honestly, it has to be controlled and tailored to each particular country. One of the biggest mistakes that we have seen so far is that, with the anaerobics, people are always talking about anaerobics. Okay, a producer, I wanted to know, how is an anaerobic being done? Oh, you take the coffee, you pick it, you ferment it for 150 hours, then you depulp it, you wash it, and voila, you have an anaerobic coffee. It's not that simple. Yes, there is innovation, but you have to control the process. You have to understand what is going on. And that is one of the things that we're doing in Cup of Excellence. Not only are we discovering that quality, but we're also trying to teach the producer where he went wrong in some of the coffees that he is processing. In an anaerobic coffee, basically you have to take in consideration the variety. Some varieties have a lot more mucilage than others. The ambient temperature and humidity, that's going to tell you, how long you can actually ferment the coffee, and also the type of water they're using. Is the water, is it alkaline? Is it acidic? All these have a big impact on the quality of coffee they're going to be putting out. So we saw, and we were noticing in Cup of Excellence that the anaerobic coffees were the ones who were actually becoming the winners, and everybody was rewarding these coffees, and not necessarily because they were excelling, in quality, but because they were very easy to identify. So in Cup of Excellence, what we did is we decided to separate these by categories. So we have a traditional wash category. We have a honey or natural, and an experimental process. Now, this can be tailored to each individual country and to the needs of each individual country. So Costa Rica may have a category for washed exotics, or honey natural exotics, or, depending what they want. Guatemala may be something different. Honduras started implementing a little bit something more, that they wanted to highlight their national variety, which is the Parainema. So the Parainema was one category separately. So this way, we're comparing apples to apples. We're not identifying a coffee just because it stood out because of something different on the table. And this is one of the biggest mistakes. Just because it's different is not necessarily good. Just because a geisha is not necessarily good. It's got to be a good geisha. It's got to have all the defined qualities of a geisha. So in categorizing the competition, we're comparing apples to apples, and everything was being analyzed the same way. So the results of all this process has pretty much given us, providing us a quality that we have identified, that a coffee has to be pretty much uniform, balanced, with all the different, quality attributes. We do not want a coffee that is acidity only. We don't want a coffee that is only sweetness. We don't want a coffee that is only body. So if we can take each one of these attributes as a circle, we want that coffee to be pretty much in the middle. Let me see if I could work this thing. Right there. Guess I'm still shaking a little bit too much. You guys are making me nervous. Over the years, Cup of Excellence has pretty much established global standards. One of the things that happened, it was really, really successful, back in 1999, is that Cup of Excellence was rewarding not only quality, but they were rewarding a producer story. So the coffee was pretty much given a face and a name. Before this, all the coffees were being blended out. So you can have a coffee farm that was producing great quality coffee, but it was being sold to a local exporter who was blending these coffees, with the rest of the coffees that he had, and the quality was pretty much either blended out or used to improve the total, quality of the blend that they were trying to sell. There's different processes that we have also pioneered, and it looks like it doesn't really mean that much, but we started playing around with vacuum packing. At first we figured, okay, this is great, easy. Go in, vacuum pack it, let it, export it. Then we started seeing what the impact of water activity was on this type of packaging. So we have always been at the forefront trying to define what the industry standard is for each one of these different processes. Something that comes to mind that, I didn't have here the presentation, but the first time that I ever came here to Costa Rica to draw samples to do water activity in the coffees, I noticed that all the parchment was stored in these plastic bags. I'm like, what is this? This is crazy. This is going to affect the coffee. I had no idea what Grain Pro was back then. So I still remember, I went in and I complained to, Cafefinos, and they're like, no, this is a Grain Pro bag. It does this and this and this. Then we started looking at it and seeing what the benefits were of this. So these are the type of things that we're bringing always to the forefront, to change what the industry can expect. Now, obviously, for the newer generation, exporting in Grain Pro, that's standard. Pretty much if it's for specialty coffee, vacuum packing, that's standard. We have now roasters who are expecting their coffees to have a specific water activity reading or humidity reading. I come from an export family, and I've had a coffee that one time got delivered to a client, and the coffee had a 0.6 water activity. He told me the coffee was wet. Like, what are you talking about? It's, 11% humidity. It's got a 0.6 water activity. He's like, yeah, but I don't buy anything that's above 0.58. Okay, so we pretty much, started creating a monster here. The industry really hasn't defined or given a technical scientific reason what the water activity should be. We understand its importance. We understand, why it's good. We understand why you should have certain limits for it, but there really isn't a study to say this is what the cutoff should be. So we have been talking with different organizations, the Center for Coffee Research at Texas A&M, to start doing studies like this, start doing studies about, the embryo, what happens to the embryo whenever you're doing an anaerobic process, stuff like this, that we can come back and inform the producers. The impact that we've had at Cup of Excellence throughout coffee, it's been really, really important. We're talking, I heard a presentation earlier talking about economic sustainability, and how we can't control or pretty much identify how much coffee the producer takes home. But with Cup of Excellence, it's pretty much and very well defined. We guarantee that a producer will take home anywhere between 78 to 85% of the total auction value. Now, why do we have, a range? Obviously, the higher the prices, the more, that producer can be, I hate using the word taxed, but deducted a commission that he has to, give back to the organization to help execute the program the following year. So the higher the price, the more they can contribute. Now, all of this is stipulated, all this is defined before the competition takes place. The producer knows exactly how much money, he gets to take home, according to whatever the auction proceeds are. So knowing this helps him, plan better for the future. Obviously the winning coffees, as I mentioned earlier, also tend to create a long-term working relationship with the producer that they're working with. And something that we are really pushing nowadays is community development. We have a new program that we implemented last year, and we selected only 5 producers, winners. Costa Rica actually has one of these coffee legends, the Legends of Excellence, Don Antonio Barrantes. We have other producers in different countries. But this was something more than just quality. These are producers that have won several times at Cup of Excellence. But not only do we want to have that quality, proven quality, in Cup of Excellence, We want to see that these producers are actually giving back to the community. So part of the component to be a legend of excellence is not only proving yourself in competition, but also what are you doing for your community with the proceeds that you're making. This is the only way that the coffee industry at origin is going to, come out ahead. Another benefit that we have is that Cup of Excellence normally becomes a door of diversification. Now, obviously, all of this depends on the producer themselves. This is a good example that we have here on the screen. Finca Guanacaste in El Salvador. They were the first place winners. I guess it was back in 2022. And they used their proceeds to create, or to build 3 little cabins, and now they have an Airbnb of their farm. So not only are they selling coffee to the people who bought the coffee at auction, which is a company in Thailand and Korea, but now they're also leasing out, some of these cabins to the Airbnb and doing a lot more of the eco-tourism. We are beyond a cup. We are pretty much trying to unify everybody that's interested in quality, not only individually, but organizations. Here in Costa Rica, we work directly with cafefinos, but we also, get a lot of benefits, and we have a lot of communications with the people at Café through cafefinos. In Guatemala, we have Ana Café that we work with. Honduras is Café, Nicaragua is Conatradec, BSCA in Brazil. So we tend and we try to find in-country partners that can guarantee the transparency, the fairness, and the representation of the producers. We don't want an organization that's not going to guarantee the producer gets paid within that range that I told you guys before, 78 and 85% of the total auction proceeds. We have had in-country partners that take more money. We have had in-country partners that delay the payment. And what we do is we make sure that the producers get paid, but we walk away. We're never going to, risk our ethical standards that we have just to be executing a program in a country. This is a victory for all the winning coffee farmers. The spotlight, something that I used to love, our founder used to say whenever she was doing a speech, to the international jury, is basically, yes, it's great to get recognition, for the great work that you're doing, in your farm. But obviously, if you have a monetary recompensation for that hard work, it's even better. Now, if you're able to form a long-term working relationship with your buyer, that's even better. So one of the things that we also always mention is that normally these producers only produce so much amount of coffee. So they draw the attention, of these regions where they're producing coffee, and they tend to draw all these buyers. In Guatemala, when before the Cup of Excellence there, I know that Huehuetenango was pretty much not heard of. Everybody knew of Antigua in Guatemala. Now, a lot of the best coffees are recognized as coming out of Huehuetenango. In Honduras, whoever thought that Honduras produced great quality coffee? Now, this one region in Honduras, Santa Barbara, is known for producing these great quality coffees. In Brazil, Carmo de Minas. Well, whoever thought that Brazil could produce great quality coffee? Pacific regions in Brazil, Carmo de Minas, Bahia, they're producing great quality coffees. And I think it's funny, they promote these coffees as Central America types, which is kind of scary because that basically means that they can produce coffee that we can in Central America that could draw the prices down eventually, if they keep on doing this. But no, but seriously, the roasters, they're all about origin, identifying, the quality of what's being pretty much identified there. So we want to always pursue that long-term working relationship. The storytelling is really what has made Cup of Excellence successful. It's really what has put us at the forefront of what it is that we're doing. We're representing the coffee industry, of that particular country. The buyers, they ride the wave of prestige. Obviously, they cannot just sell these coffees because they bought these coffees at $20, $25, $30 a pound. They need the storytelling. They need the information, of the producer, how it impacts that producer, his family, how it impacts that community. So differentiating coffee shops by having award-winning coffees is always great. And there's no place better than in Asia, Japan, Korea, even China now, that you walk into a coffee shop and you can see Cup of Excellence coffees. Even if they don't have Cup of Excellence coffees, they talk about, coffees from Costa Rica, cafés de Guatemala, and you see these different producers, even if they're not Cup of Excellence coffees. So it's giving this recognition directly to the producer because of the hard work that either they or other producers have done, in the Cup of Excellence. Obviously, there are challenges and opportunities. We thrive to obtain objectivity and inclusion, but it's always very, very difficult. Like I said, we're a very small organization, and we try to make a big impact, but we do not have a reach to actually be policing everything that is happening. Even though that with the 6 staff people that we have, we're always on top of it. It's hard to get, a good night's sleep because we have, competitions in 11 countries, so, sometimes we have competition going on in Indonesia or Thailand or Taiwan, that's 12, 13 hours difference, and we always have to be on top to make sure that everything gets done the same way in every single country. We're seeking educational opportunities. We are pretty much training the industry how to evaluate, how to recognize great quality coffee and to be able to communicate that quality. It's not simply going in there and saying, oh, this coffee is an 88. Okay, it's an 88, but why is it an 88? Explain it. It's kind of like, buying a great bottle of wine. You don't only get a great bottle of wine that says, okay, this coffee got a 92 on such a ranking, but it gives you the description of what that coffee is. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to communicate our findings, to increase consumer awareness. As I mentioned, we're also, all about building a fair and inclusive platform. Our competitions are open to all the producers where the competitions are being held. It's not just one organization. If you look at the winners from every Cup of Excellence in all the countries we work with, yes, there are going to be some producers who have learned how to excel, and they're normally, repeat winners. But you do not see the same 8 to 10 winners every single time. You see different winners, different regions. So that is something that we're all about, opening the doors to pretty much, all the coffee industry. So Cup of Excellence, is a trend. We're trendsetters. So some, as I mentioned earlier, some well-known names that we know in the United States: Stumptown, Intelligentsia, Counterculture. I have to do a little extra promotion here. I always say that I'm a great example of what Cup of Excellence can do. My family were coffee producers out of Nicaragua. Back in, when was it? Like 2005, 2006. I happened to be in Colombia for a Cup of Excellence. I was there with Scott Merle. Scott Merle was with Batdorf and Bronson at the time, and he said a crazy thing at that time. Hey, how would you like to do a long-term contract? You know, I had met him through Cup of Excellence, even though the company we had been selling to before, you know, and we created that long-term relationship that we're still selling to that company. You know, so that is what Cup of Excellence is all about. Opening the doors, you know, to all the coffee producers, you know, and to the roasters to have access to them. These are the results of the Cup of Excellence in Costa Rica, you know, the past 18 editions that we've had. You know, so if you look, we've had in 18 editions a total of $10 million dollars that have been auctioned off in Costa Rica. You know, it's kind of funny. You know, now we look at that number, that first time in Costa Rica, we had an average price of $4, $4.05. At these current markets, we look at that and goes like, is that it? You know, I still remember in Nicaragua, you know, the first year, we broke the record that time. You know, that first auction, it was a $10.30 or something like that for the first place winner. You know, so obviously what was impactful back then, now we look at it, and it's kind of funny because you talk to producers, and if they don't get $30, $40 a pound for their coffee, or the first place winner doesn't get, you know, $100 a pound, they're disappointed. You know, so we're always trying to tell them and remind them that it's really not about the money. The benefits the Cup of Excellence will bring to you outweighs anything that you can get at auction. As a Cup of Excellence winner, you're only selling maximum, you know, 5, 6, 7 bags of coffee. Most producers produce a lot more than that. So what we're trying to do is create that market access to all these producers, to high quality coffee buyers. Okay, thank you very much. You know, I'm going to be around for the rest of the week. Anybody who would like to talk about Cup of Excellence, you know, or award-winning coffees, you know, please reach out to me. You know, I know there's no time for questions and, you know, questions and answers. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.